some words land softly, some words land hard, and some words, said in the wrong room at about the wrong person, land in a way that changes the temperature of everything around them instantly. This was one of those moments. It was a Tuesday afternoon in the Family Feud studio. The lights were warm, the audience was relaxed. Two families were midway through a game that had been moving along with the easy, comfortable energy of a good taping, laughs in the right places, the board lighting up, Steve Harvey doing what Steve Harvey does, and then a husband leaned into the microphone and described his wife of 27 years with a single word. Embarrassing. He did not whisper it. He did not seem to recognize in the moment he said it what the word would do to the air in that room. He said it the way people say things they have said privately so many times that they have forgotten the things we say in private carry weight when they arrive in public. He said it like a statement of fact, like something he had always known and had simply never had occasion to say out loud before. The audience went quiet in the way audiences go quiet when something unexpected and uncomfortable has just happened and nobody is quite sure what the appropriate response is. Steve Harvey's response was not quiet. It was not delayed. It was not measured or careful or diplomatic. It was instant. And it was the kind of response that makes you understand, watching it, why it matters to have someone with a platform who is willing to use it correctly. Linda Okafor was 53 years old, a community health worker from Detroit, Michigan, who had spent the better part of 2 decades going door to door in underserved neighborhoods, connecting families to medical resources, food assistance programs, and mental health services that most of them did not know were available. It was not glamorous work. It did not pay extraordinarily well. It required a person to absorb daily the weight of other people's hardest circumstances and to keep showing up with energy and warmth the following morning. Linda had that kind of energy naturally. She was expressive, quick to laugh, physically animated in conversations, the kind of person who uses her whole body when she is excited about something, whose enthusiasm arrives visibly and immediately and without calculation. She had been that way since childhood, according to her sister Paulette, who described her as the person in any room who made the room feel larger simply by being fully herself inside it. Her husband, Walter Okafor, was 57, a systems analyst for the city of Detroit who had built a career on precision structure and the careful management of complex systems. He was methodical in his professional life and methodical in his personal one. He dressed conservatively, spoke economically, and moved through the world with the measured deliberateness of a man who believes that most problems are the result of insufficient planning. He was not without warmth. His children adored him, his colleagues respected him deeply, but his warmth expressed itself in reliability rather than expressiveness, in showing up rather than showing. They had been married for 27 years. In many ways, they were the classic complementary pair. Linda filled every room she entered, and Walter anchored it. Her energy and his steadiness had produced, for the first 15 or so years of their marriage, something that worked. Something that felt, to both of them, like a genuine and functional whole. But somewhere in the second decade, something had shifted. Walter's appreciation for his wife's expressiveness, the quality that had drawn him to her in the first place, the warmth and fullness of her presence, had curdled, gradually and without any single identifiable moment of change, into something closer to discomfort. He had begun to find her enthusiasm excessive. Her expressiveness in settings he considered formal or important had started to feel to him like a liability, a reflection on him. He had said things, not dramatically, not cruelly, but in the steady, matter-of-fact way of a man who believes he is providing useful feedback rather than causing harm. He had suggested she lower her voice at his work functions. He had asked her not to tell certain stories in front of certain people. He had, in the language of gentle correction applied consistently over years, communicated to his wife that the fullest version of herself was too much, that she needed to be edited. Linda had absorbed this, because she loved Walter, because she trusted his judgment in the way that partners trust each other's assessments over time, because the people who know us best are also the people most capable of making us doubt ourselves, and because the editing had happened so gradually, in such small increments, that she had not noticed the shape of what she had become until the day on that stage when someone else noticed it for her. Their daughter Amara, 20, had entered the family in the show's application after a conversation with her aunt, Paulette, that had lasted 3 hours, and had ended with both of them agreeing that something needed to happen. Amara had grown up watching her mother shrink. Not all at once. That was the thing that made it so difficult to point to. But steadily, in small surrenders of volume and expressiveness and story and laughter, her mother had become a quieter version of herself in any setting that Walter considered important. Amara had written on the application, "My mother is one of the most extraordinary people I have ever known. She lights up every room she walks into, or she used to. I want her to remember that about herself. I want someone to see her the way we see her." The production team had called 2 days later. Walter had agreed to participate with the brisk efficiency of a man who considered it a reasonable activity. He had reviewed the show's format in advance. He had, Amara noted with the particular exasperation of a daughter who knows her father well, prepared answers for common survey categories. He arrived at the studio on time, dressed appropriately, and settled into the green room with his phone and a bottle of water. Linda had arrived wearing a bright coral blouse that Amara had encouraged her to choose, and small gold earrings, and a smile that was, if you knew to look for what it was working around, just slightly more contained than would have been 10 years ago. Just slightly more careful. She laughed with the production staff in the green room. She asked questions about how the show worked. She was warm and present and, in the particular way of people who have learned to manage themselves in public, thoroughly likable without being entirely free. Family Feud has always been a show about laughter. The OK for Family faced off against the Patterson family from Cleveland, and through the opening rounds they were competitive and good. Linda was excellent. Her community health work had given her a practical, ground-level understanding of how ordinary people think about ordinary things, which is precisely the skill that Family Feud rewards, and she answered with speed and accuracy that delighted the audience. Walter answered carefully and correctly, as he did everything. Steve Harvey moved between them with the ease of someone who has read 1,000 marriages through the way couples occupy a stage, and he was enjoying both of them. The dynamic between Linda and Walter was visible but not alarming in the early rounds. She moved expressively, he stood still. She laughed fully, he smiled with containment. These were simply their different registers, and in the first 20 minutes they complemented each other in the way that different registers sometimes do. But Steve Harvey had been watching. He had noticed, in the way he notices things, that every time Linda's expressiveness peaked, every time she threw her arms up at a correct answer, every time her laugh arrived fully and without management, Walter's expression shifted, not into warmth, into something more like a wince. A small, controlled, entirely unperformed expression of discomfort that was over in a fraction of a second, but that Steve Harvey caught every single time it happened. He filed it. He kept the game moving. He waited. The category that changed the afternoon arrived in the third round. Steve stepped to the center of the stage with his characteristic ease and announced, "Why asked 100 married people? Name a quality your spouse has that you wish they didn't." The audience gave the appreciative murmur the question was designed to generate. It was the kind of category that invites good-natured self-disclosure, the slightly too loud laugh, the tendency to be late, the inability to make a decision about dinner. The category is built on affectionate complaint. It is understood, by everyone who has ever been in a long relationship, as a space for the gentle, loving acknowledgement of the ordinary friction of shared life. It was Walter's turn at the front of the group. He stepped forward. He considered the question with the brief, efficient processing of a man who rarely requires much time to formulate an answer, because his answers are always close to the surface, already organized. "Linda can be embarrassing," he said. "In public. She doesn't always read the room. She can be too much." He said it with the flat, informational delivery of a man providing data, not cruelly, not with relish. Simply as a statement of something considered factual and therefore appropriate to share. The audience did not laugh. The easy, anticipatory energy of the category, the energy of gentle, affectionate complaint, had not been what Walter delivered. What he had delivered was something different, something that did not have the warmth of affection in it, something that landed in the room with a weight that affectionate complaint does not carry. Linda, standing 2 feet to his left, had gone very still. The coral blouse, the gold earrings, the smile that had been slightly more careful than it used to be, that smile was no longer present. In its place was an expression of careful neutrality that was, to anyone who understood what they were looking at, the face of a woman absorbing something familiar. Amara in the family group closed her eyes briefly. Just briefly. then opened them and looked at her mother with the expression of a daughter who has watched this happen in smaller rooms for years and is watching it happen in the largest one yet. Steve Harvey did not consult the board. He did not move toward the answer reveal. He set the microphone down on the podium with a deliberateness that communicated, without a single word, that the game had just become secondary. The shift in the studio was immediate and complete. 200 people, a moment ago relaxed and forward-moving, had recalibrated around something that required a different quality of attention. Nobody was laughing. Nobody was shifting in their seat or checking their phone or doing any of the small, involuntary things that audiences do when their attention is partly elsewhere. Every person in that room was entirely present, watching Steve Harvey stand at the center of the stage with the microphone at his side, looking at Walter O'Keefe. Walter, for his part, had not yet registered that anything unusual was happening. He was a man who had stated what he considered a fact, and facts, in his experience, did not require the kind of reaction the room was giving him. He looked at Steve with the mild, expectant expression of a man waiting for the board to light up. Steve did not look at the board. He looked at Linda. "Mrs. O'Keefe," he said. Linda looked at him. "How long have you been hearing that?" The question was quiet, it was specific, and it bypassed every layer of management and containment that Linda O'Keefe had learned to apply to herself over 27 years, because it was the question nobody had ever thought to ask her directly. She was quiet for a moment. "Long time," she said. What Steve Harvey did in the next several minutes was not a lecture and was not a performance. It was the direct, unhurried response of a man who had been watching something build across an entire afternoon and had reached the point where continuing to watch without speaking was no longer something he was willing to do. He turned to Walter. "I want to ask you something," he said, "and I need you to answer it honestly, not as a system analyst, not as a man who has thought through the correct response. Just honestly." Walter nodded, with the careful attentiveness of a man who is beginning to understand that the afternoon has moved into territory he did not plan for. "When you walk into a room with Linda, when she is fully herself, when she is laughing and telling stories and lighting the place up, what do you feel?" Walter opened his mouth. Steve raised one hand gently. "Before you answer, let me tell you what I have watched you feel for the past 30 minutes every time she did exactly that. I watched you wince. Small, quick. But I saw it every time. The studio was completely still. You winced," Steve said, "at your wife, at the thing that makes her who she is, and then just now you stood at a microphone on national television and called the most vibrant person in this room embarrassing." He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "I need you to sit with that for a second, because I don't think you're a bad man. I think you are a man who has been so busy managing how things look that you have lost the ability to feel how things are, and what is in front of you right now." He gestured toward Linda, who was standing very still in the coral blouse, eyes bright, hands folded, "is a woman who has spent 27 years making herself smaller so that you would be more comfortable, and she did it because she loves you, and you just called her embarrassing." The word landed in the room differently the second time. The first time, Walter had said it with the flatness of statement. Steve said it with the weight of what it actually was, not a description but a verdict that a person had been living under for a very long time. Walter O'Keefe was a man who did not, as a rule, have visible emotional responses in public settings. His professional life had trained him in the management of reaction, in the discipline of considered response over immediate one. He was not a man who surprised himself in rooms. He surprised himself now. His expression had been changing throughout Steve's response in the small, involuntary ways that expressions change when a person is receiving something true that they had not framed as true before. Not a collapse, not a dramatic revelation. The quiet, private reorganization of a man who has just been shown the shape of something he did not know he was doing. "I didn't think of it as," he started. "Stopped. As what?" Steve asked, gently, without pressure. Walter looked at his wife. She was looking back at him with an expression that was not accusatory and was not wounded in the performed sense. It was simply honest, the unmanaged, uncontained face of a woman who has stopped, for this moment, editing herself in the way she had learned to do. Because Steve Harvey had just named the editing, and the naming had made the continuation of it unnecessary. "I didn't think of it as criticism," Walter said. I thought I was giving her useful information about how she was coming across." "To who?" Steve asked. Walter was quiet. "To Walter. Who was she embarrassing?" because I have been standing in this room for 30 minutes, and I have watched 200 people respond to your wife with warmth and delight every single time she opened her mouth. The only person in this room who winced was you." The silence after that was the longest of the afternoon. From the family group behind her parents, Amar Okafor stepped forward. She was 28 years old and she had the particular, composed authority of a young woman who has been waiting the moment for a long time and has recognized, in this moment, that it has arrived. "Dad," she said, "I need to say something." Walter looked at his daughter. "I grew up watching Mom make herself quieter every year a little less of her in rooms where you were present. I watched her stop telling the story about the neighborhood cat, because you gave her a look the first time she told it. I watched her stop singing in the car when you were in it. I watched her ask Aunt Paulette not to bring up the community garden project at your work dinners because you'd told her it wasn't relevant." Amara's voice was steady and clear and without theatrics. She was not performing grief. She was delivering a record. She loves you. She has always loved you. She has spent 27 years changing herself to fit what you needed her to be, and you just called her embarrassing on national television like it was nothing. Walter looked at his daughter, then at his wife. The careful, managed expression of a man who has always known how he appears was, for the first time all afternoon, entirely absent. What was left was simply a face. A person. A man who had just understood something about himself that he would not be able to understand. "Linda," he said. She looked at him. He stopped. He was not a man who had easy access to the language of this kind of moment. He had spent 57 years building a life that did not require it. The reaching for it now was visible and effortful and entirely genuine. "I did not know I was doing that to you. I knew I had preferences. I did not know I had turned them into a cage." The word arrived in the room with the weight of a man who had found, in the searching, more truth than he had anticipated. Linda looked at her husband for a long time. Then she said, with the full, unmanaged warmth of a woman who had just been given permission to stop editing, "I know, Walter. I know you didn't know. That's the part that's been the hardest." The audience rose without prompting, and the sound of 200 people on their feet was not the triumphant sound of a game show win. It was something quieter and more complex. The sound of a room that has witnessed something real and does not know what to do with it except stand. Steve Harvey stood back. He did not speak for a moment. When he did, his voice was low. "That woman is not embarrassing," he said. "That woman is extraordinary, and she has been extraordinary this whole time. The only thing that needed to change was whether you could see it." The game did not continue that afternoon. The production team made the quiet, unanimous decision that the taping had reached its natural conclusion, and that attempting to return to the format would serve no one. The Okafor family remained on the stage for a long time after the audience had begun to clear, the 5 of them occupying the space in the particular way of people who have just been through something significant together and are not yet ready to step back into the ordinary world. Steve Harvey spent time with the family privately. He spoke at length with Linda, not about Walter, not about the marriage, but about her, about the community health work, about what she was proudest of, about the neighborhood garden project that Amara had mentioned, which turned out to be a program Linda had built over 4 years from nothing, connecting 32 families in her district to sustainable food sources, and which she had stopped mentioning in certain company because she had been told it wasn't relevant. Steve Harvey listened to all of it. Then he said, "That is one of the most important things I have heard about in a long time, and you stopped talking about it because someone told you to. Don't do that again. Don't ever do that again." Linda laughed, fully, without management. The laugh arrived the way it was meant to, taking up all the space it needed. Walter, standing nearby, heard it, and this time he did not wince. The broadcast reached an audience that responded to it with the particular intensity that the show's production team had come to associate with its most significant moments. Not the peak viewer numbers of a highly promoted episode, but the deep, personal engagement of viewers for whom the content had arrived as something other than entertainment. The clip of Walter calling Linda embarrassing, followed by Steve Harvey's immediate and unhesitating response, moved through social media within hours of broadcast with a velocity that the show's digital team described as extraordinary. What was striking about the response was not its volume alone but its specificity. People were not sharing the clip as a general statement about bad behavior. They were sharing it in personal terms, tagging specific people, adding personal captions, writing in comments about their own experiences of being managed, edited, and told they were too much by the people closest to them. The phrase, too much, appeared in the comments with a frequency that was itself a kind of data. Thousands of people, predominantly but not exclusively women, wrote about the experience of being described as too much by a partner or spouse. Too loud, too emotional, too enthusiastic, too present. The cumulative effect of being told, in small and consistent increments, that the fullest version of oneself was an inconvenience. That the correct version was smaller. Steve Harvey's line, "The only person in this room who winced was you," became the phrase that traveled furthest. It appeared in social media bios, in essay titles, in the titles of podcast episodes about long-term relationships and the slow erosion of self that can occur within them. It articulated something that many people had experienced without having the precise language for. The person who calls you embarrassing is usually not embarrassed by you. They are managing something internal that has nothing to do with you and everything to do with them. The follow-up segment, produced 4 months after the broadcast, found a man who was, by his own account, in the most uncomfortable and most productive period of his adult life. Walter Okafor had, in the weeks following the taping, sought out a therapist, a decision he described as the most counterintuitive thing he had ever done and the most necessary. "I have spent my entire career identifying system failures and correcting them," he said in the follow-up interview. "I had never applied that methodology to myself, because I had never considered that I might be the system that needed correcting." He had arrived in therapy with what his therapist described as a presenting issue of communication style, and had discovered, over the course of several months, that the issue was considerably more fundamental. A childhood in a household where expressiveness had been associated with instability, a professional culture that had rewarded restraint and penalized visibility, decades of conditioning that had taught him, without anyone ever stating it directly, that people who took up too much space were a liability, and that managing them was an act of helpfulness rather than control. "I thought I was helping her," he said. He said it with the particular, clear-eyed honesty of a man who has done enough work to stop protecting himself from the truth of it. "I genuinely believed I was giving her useful guidance. The idea that what I was actually doing was making her smaller because her fullness made me uncomfortable. That took me a long time to sit with. It is still not comfortable to sit with." He paused. "But it is the truth. And I am a man who believes in working with the truth rather than around it, even when the truth is about you." Linda Okafor's account of the months following the taping was quieter and more personal. She did not, in the follow-up segment, speak at length about the marriage or about Walter's process. She spoke about herself. She had gone back to the neighborhood garden project with a different energy. She had submitted a grant application that she had been drafting for 2 years, and had not submitted because she was uncertain it was worth anyone's time. The grant had been awarded. The program was expanding. She was speaking at a community health conference in the spring, the first public speaking engagement she had accepted in 6 years, because she had stopped accepting them after Walter had attended one and told her afterward that she had rambled. "I had made myself so small in certain rooms," she said, "that I had started to believe the small version was the real one, that the woman who used to fill up a space and not apologize for it was somebody I used to be, not somebody I still was." She paused. "Steve Harvey looked at me on that stage and saw her. He saw the real version, and something about being seen by someone who had no reason to be kind to me, someone who just genuinely saw it, made it possible to see it again myself." Amara, in the follow-up, simply said, "She's back, the full version, she's back. And our house sounds different now. It sounds the way it used to when I was a kid, before things got quiet. It sounds like her." The response to the Okafor moment contributed to a conversation that relationship researchers and therapists noted had been underway for some time, but rarely received the kind of clear, accessible, publicly witnessed illustration that the clip provided. The conversation was about what researchers describe as relational diminishment, the gradual process by which one partner, through consistent criticism, correction, or expressions of discomfort, communicates to the other that their authentic self requires management, that their natural way of being in the world is inconvenient. Unlike overt control or identifiable abuse, relational diminishment operates in the register of the reasonable. Each individual act of correction can be defended as well-intentioned. The partner who winces is not attacking. The partner who suggests toning it down is not threatening. It is only in accumulation over years that the pattern becomes visible, and by that point, the person on the receiving end has often so thoroughly internalized the corrections that they can no longer easily distinguish between their own preferences and the preferences that have been installed in them. Linda Okafor had been in exactly that position. Her community health background made her, in retrospect, an unusually clear-eyed witness to her own process. I work with families where people have internalized messages about their own worth from systems designed to diminish them, she said in the conference presentation she gave in the spring. I help them identify those messages and separate them from the truth of who they are. I had not done that work for myself. I had not recognized that the same dynamic could operate inside a loving marriage, carried by a person who genuinely meant well. The conference room, by all accounts, was very quiet when she said it. In a subsequent interview, Steve Harvey was asked about the wince, the small, involuntary expression of discomfort that he had observed in Walter throughout the taping, and that had been the foundation of his response. "That wince told me everything," he said. "I have been doing this show long enough to know that the wince is not about embarrassment. Embarrassment is a social emotion. It is about what other people think of you. When a man winces at his wife's laughter in a room full of strangers who are laughing along with her, that is not embarrassment. That is something internal, something old, something that has nothing to do with her and everything to do with him." He paused. "The tragedy of it is that the person who gets assigned the label, embarrassing too much, too loud, spends years trying to correct something in themselves that was never the problem. The problem was never her, it was his relationship to expressiveness, to joy, to taking up space, and instead of doing the work to understand that, he outsourced it to her as a management problem." He was asked why he had responded so quickly, why he had not waited, had not chosen a gentler approach. "Because I have watched women spend years in rooms where nobody said anything," he said simply, "and I had a microphone and I had a room that was listening, and I had a woman standing right in front of me who had been told she was too much for 27 years. You do not wait in those moments. You speak." Walter Okafor walked onto that stage as a man who believed he was managing his marriage with the same careful competence he applied to everything else in his professional life. He walked off as a man who understood, for the first time, that what he had been managing was not a system, it was a person, and that the management had been doing something to her that he had not been willing, until that afternoon, to see. Linda Okafor walked on as a woman who had spent 27 years making herself fit a space that had been drawn around her by someone else's discomfort. She walked off having been seen, fully publicly, without management or apology, by a room full of strangers who found her not embarrassing but extraordinary, who laughed with her, not at her, who rose to their feet not because she had won a game, but because she had stood in the truth of who she was and let it be enough. Amara walked on hoping her mother would have a great day. She walked off having delivered, in a handful of sentences, the most honest accounting of her family's dynamic that had ever been spoken aloud in any room. And having watched her father hear it, really hear it, and Steve Harvey reacted instantly, not because the format required it, not because the cameras were on him, but because a man had just called an extraordinary woman embarrassing in front of 200 people, and Steve Harvey was not prepared to let that word stand without a response. "The only person in this room who winced was you." That was what he said. 8 words, and they were enough, because they were true, and truth, said clearly, said directly, said without hesitation by someone willing to say it, has a way of rearranging the furniture of a room that no amount of careful management can undo. Linda Okafor is not embarrassing. She never was. The room knew it before Steve Harvey said it. He just made sure Walter knew it too.